Good morning, y'all. How are you guys this morning? Whoops. All right. We have sound. I don't know why I'm always so preoccupied with whether or not we have sound. I always feel like I have to check for that. Because I think it would be tragic for me to come on here and do all that talking and we don't have any sound. Good morning. Welcome to my channel. My name is Natasha. This morning I have a live for you guys that's kind of reflective, okay? Because for my morning chill, I'm still going through David's life. And now the judgment that we talked about in the last live, you know, what God said would happen to David as a result of the things that he did, you know, with regards to Bathsheba and murdering Uriah, etc., are coming to pass. That's what I've been reading the beginnings of those things coming to pass today, because I had to read 2 Samuel 13 through 15. And as I was reading it, I've been marveling over how everything unfolds as opposed to how I would expect things to unfold based on how the judgment comes out of Nathan's mouth, okay? And so I wanted to go back and look at the judgment again. And then I wanted to go through 2 Samuel 13 through 15, kind of like reflecting on how it unfolds and how it stands out to me that, I don't know, it kind of makes me want to read the judgment in a different way than I read it the first time, okay? And I'm going to see if it's possible for me to do that now. Let's go back. I'm in 2 Samuel. Well, you know what? When we read about David and Bathsheba, it was that second? Yeah, it was 2 Samuel 11 through 12. So let's see if we can find the judgment. Yeah, it's in chapter 12. And, you know, this is right after, you know, Nathan comes to David and gives him that parable of the rich man and the poor man, and the rich man taking the only little lamb that the poor man has. And David is so angry, he passes judgment against the rich man. And Nathan points out to him that the parable is really about him. And it's and this is what Nathan says. And it's God dealing with you about the situation between you and Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite. Okay? So verse 7 says, then Nathan, this is 2 Samuel 12, verse 7, says, then Nathan said to David, you are the man. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your keeping, and gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I also would have given you much more. Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword. You have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Now, therefore, okay, so starting at verse 10 is what I'm referring to as the judgment that comes over David for what he did. Okay, so this is how I read it the first time. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord. So verse 11, thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives from your eyes, and give them to your neighbor, and shall lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. No, sorry. That did not read right. It's not God's gonna lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. It says what it actually says is, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun. Talk about slip of the tongue. Okay, verse 12. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, before the sun. And so the first time I read this, you kind of have this picture of David, and we know he comes to repent. So I'm like, how does this thing unfold? So I kind of had this image of David. I mean, I knew the story. I know how everything's going to unfold because I've read it before. But I'm just saying, in the moment, you're experiencing it as if you've never read it before. And so the way this judgment reads, I can almost picture a person who's repented, okay? And they did everything they could do to make things right, but now they have to experience this punishment, this judgment, because a lot of times we see judgment as punishment. I'm not sure if that's the right way to see it, but that's kind of like how we see it, right? And so, you see this man who's repented, and now his heart is toward God, and he's trying to live his life. But this curse, and I almost kind of blame fairy tales for this, because think about Beauty and the Beast and the curse that came on them when the fairy godmother wasn't invited and all of that. Okay, so you're going about your business, and then this power, this omnipotent power, God is kind of throwing things at you, in punishment for what you've done. And so I kind of saw it as everybody's going about their business, good citizens doing what they're supposed to do, and God manipulates people's emotions and feelings, and he makes strife be in David's house. And it came independent of those people, is punishment. So they're like puppets, and God is causing strife to fall because he's mad because of what David did, to Uriah and the situation with Bathsheba. He's manipulating his family members, and he's bringing strife in there, and he's manipulating things, and he's causing somebody to sleep with David's wife, and that's because of his punishment that he's made because he's mad. Okay. But when I was getting into the story, I was seeing something different. Because when I was thinking about God the first way, it's kind of hard to reconcile myself that God is a good God, God is kind, God is merciful, God is loving. It wasn't the whole point for him to repent. So if he repented and he truly, turned his heart towards you and you restored him, then why do we have to do the punishment part? And there's a part of me that, almost wants to feel like, why does all that suffering have to happen? You've made everything right. He realized he was wrong. Why can't we move on from that? Why does it Why does the children have to have a role to play in this? And why does that have to happen to his wives in broad daylight? You're not mad anymore. After all, he repented. Okay, and it's almost like when you see it as God is doing these bad things to this man that's repented, it almost seems like, man, he's a little harsh. It's a little harsh. Okay, it's a little harsh. Okay, but I was surprised to see how things unfolded in the story, and it almost made me want to read this judgment in a different way. The first way I read it is, you did this, and so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this. Okay, after I watched the way the story unfolded, it made me want to read it like this instead. Okay, it made me want to read it like this. I'll start at verse 9. Why have you despised my commandment? Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword. You have taken his wife to be your wife and have killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor. And he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, before the sun. Okay? So it's almost like he's saying, after I read how the story unfolds, it's almost like he's saying, David, why did you choose to walk away from the righteous path? Don't you know that when you sin, it sets things into motion? Don't you know that this sin that you're committing is not only going to affect you? Don't you realize that it's going to affect your family? Don't you realize that this example that you're showing them is going to be something that they can't help but emulate? What's going to end up happening to you, David, is that this sin will continue to repeat itself in your household because of the example that you gave. This is going to repeat itself. There's going to be strife in your house. And it's going to always be there. And this thing that you did with Bathsheba in secret is going to be multiplied. Is going to happen in your own house. And you won't be able to hide it. Okay? Because it's going to be magnified that much. And all of this is happening to you, David, because you chose to step on this path when I provided a better path for you to be on. So, I accept your repentance. I accept it. Okay. But you set these things into motion. Okay. And I think for me, because that kind of understanding can kind of make me feel like, okay, so wow, so if I mess up, I can repent, but things are set into motion. What can I do about that? I'm doomed to reap negative consequences for my actions. Okay. But what I'm coming to realize, like what I'm comforted with is, the level of relationship that I'm walking with God now, I can then petition God about those things. But let's look at how the story unfolds for David. Okay. And it's fascinating how it unfolds. it's not, it doesn't, it's not, things are not unfolding out of the blue. And it's like, as you read everything that happens, you can see the connection. You can see where these behaviors came from and where they originated from. Okay? And so let's take a look at 2 Samuel chapter 13. Okay? It says, "And after this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her." Okay, so we know that David had a whole bunch of wives. So just to give you guys context, Absalom is the son of one of David's wives named Maacah. Okay, her father, Maacah, is a princess. Okay, Maacah was a princess. Her father is the king, is Talmai, the king of Geshur. So Absalom is Amnon's half brother, because they have, David's their father, but they have different mothers. Okay, Amnon is David's first son. Okay, his mother's name is Ahinoam the Jezreelitess. Okay, and so technically Amnon is first in line for the throne. He's the crown prince. All right, so apparently Absalom has a sister who has, you know, who okay, hold on. So Tamar is Amnon's half sister. That's what I'm trying to get at. Okay, so you know, this is a family affair. So let's go on. So after this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar that he became sick. Okay, so Tamar is David's daughter. Okay, so that's how Amnon is her half brother. All right. So Amnon is so distressed over his sister Tamar. Okay, hold on a minute. I gotta stop interrupting myself. Let me start back from the beginning so that you guys understand this. Okay, so it says, after this, Amnon, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. So he's in love with his half sister. Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it was improper for Amnon to do anything with her. Okay, so the reason why it was improper for Amnon to do anything with her is not only just because she's a virgin. She's a virgin, meaning she's available for marriage. Somebody could marry her, but not Amnon. Why? Because according to the law of Moses in Leviticus, okay, I'll tell you in a minute because I wrote it down exactly where it says this. Give me a minute. It's in Leviticus 18, chapter 11. Let's go to Leviticus. Leviticus 18, verse 11. It says, "The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, begotten by your father, she is your sister. You shall not uncover her nakedness." Okay, so this is basically, according to the law of Moses, you couldn't have sex with your father's daughter. You couldn't have sex with your sister. Okay, so Amnon is obsessing over something he can't have, that is not lawful and it's not right for him to have. So this is why he's distressed. He wants Tamar, but he knows he can't have her. Okay? So let's continue. Verse 3. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimei, David's brother. Now, Jonadab was a very crafty man. All right. So when I read he was a very crafty man, it immediately made me think of Satan. Okay? Because in Genesis, it describes Satan as as being crafty like this. Okay? I want to see if I could find that verse. Chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord had made. Okay, and he said to the woman, has God indeed said you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Okay, so immediately I started thinking that, wow, Satan has a way to work in this family. And Jonadab is David's nephew. So he's Amnon's, Shimei is David's brother. So this is Amnon's cousin. Okay? So it says, now Jonadab was a very crafty man. And he said to him, why are you, the king's son, becoming thinner day after day? Will you not tell me? So Amnon is he's so distressed over not being able to have Tamar, that it is visibly obvious to other people that something's wrong with him. Okay? So Amnon said to him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Your brother, she your sister too. But you're calling her my brother Absalom's sister. Okay, 5. So Jonadab said to him, lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, please let my sister Tamar come and give me food, and prepare the food in my sight that I may see it and eat it from her hand. Then Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, please let Tamar, my sister, come and make a couple of cakes for me in my sight that I may eat it from her hand. And David sent home to Tamar, saying, now go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was lying down. Then she took flour and kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and placed them out before him, and he refused to eat. Then Amnon said, have everyone go out from me. And they all went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the bedroom, that I may eat it from your hand. So, is this a fantasy that he had? This is a really intimate scene, okay? He's pretending to be sick, and he wants his sister to come and take care of him, almost like a wife would take care of her husband in that situation. So when she comes and she acts this all out for him, is this the fantasy that he has in his mind that he's walking out? Okay, he's playing with fire right now. You know you can't have her. You've brought her and put her in this situation. What's going to happen to you in this situation? Are you really going to be able to control yourself in this situation? And why do you want something you can't have? You know, once again, it's like David's sin all over again. You know, it's like David having all these wives and these concubines and feeling like he has to have Uriah's wife. Even after he knows who she is, even after he knows that, you know, what he owes, you know, his mighty men. Uriah was one of his mighty men. Her father was one of his mighty men. You know, her grandfather was one of his chief counselors. That should have been enough to stop David from doing what he did. And likewise, knowing the law of Moses should have been enough to make Amnon realize, I'm having these improper feelings toward my sister. I need to stop. I need to let go of this. But he gives himself over to it. And so to me, it goes back to the example that David has set. He doesn't deny himself his sexual passions, because in the law of Moses, God also warns kings not to multiply wives for themselves. You don't need a whole bunch of wives. You don't need a whole bunch of concubines. And to a certain extent, God's plan is for one man to be with one woman. But when we try to do it in this carnal way, where you got one man with a whole bunch of women and then you have a whole bunch of children, how are you going to meet the needs of all of those people? These men are doing it out of selfishness to satiate their own greed. Okay? But after your lust is satisfied, how are you going to meet the needs of all of these women and all of these children? Even a king that has more means than your average man because he has the wealth of the land at his disposal. How are you going to emotionally meet the needs of all of these women? How are you going to properly father all of these children? Okay, so we already see that by the choices that David has made in his life, he has already set himself up for failure. It's going to be really hard for you to be a successful husband. It's going to be really hard for you to be a successful father. And it looks like he just indulges his children. Okay, so Amnon is sick. Why does he have to have his sister come and feed him? Why does it have to specifically be her when you have all these servants? Okay. And now Amnon it seems like he's playing out some kind of fantasy. But it's not enough. His fantasy isn't enough. It's not enough for her to just feed him. Because look what happens. So she feeds him. She comes and she brings him the food. Okay. And it says, and Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought, okay, wait. So she makes the cakes and she takes the pan and places them out before him, but he refuses to eat because there are other people there. Okay? That's not enough of a fulfillment of his fantasy. It doesn't seem. It says, then Amnon said, have everyone go out from me. And they all went out from him. Verse 10, then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the bedroom that I might eat it from your hand. So now the fantasy deepens. I want to be alone with you. Let's go in the bedroom and you could feed me there. And Tamar is just following along. Okay. It says, and Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought them to Amnon, her brother, in the bedroom. So since he's sick and he looks all frail, because Jonadab is like, you've lost a lot of weight. What's wrong with you? Okay. Maybe they really believe he's sick. So maybe she doesn't feel threatened by him at all. Plus, it's her brother. She's not having these evil thoughts. He is. Okay. So she innocently goes into this situation. And so now she's bringing him food, she thinks she's about to put a cake in his mouth. But then it says he took hold of her and said to her, come, lie with me, my sister. Let's have sex? Wait. You sick though. I'm just here to feed you. What are you talking about? Okay. So in verse 12, it says, but she answered him, no, my brother, do not force me. For no such thing should be done in Israel. So she's basically saying the only way that's going to happen is if you rape me. So don't do this. Okay? She points out that it's against the law because she says for no such thing should be done in Israel. And she calls it disgraceful because she says do not do this disgraceful thing. And after you finish doing this, what am I supposed to do? In verse 13 she says, and where can I take my shame? And as for you, you would be like one of the fools in Israel. Now, therefore, so she's saying this wouldn't be good for you or me. Think about after. What are we going to do about this after? Because it's not lawful for us to be together. So after we have sex, what's going to happen next? All you can think about is your lust in the moment. But after we do this thing, how are we going to resolve the ramifications for it? Okay? And so he goes on to say, she goes on to say, now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. That's technically not true. You know, there's no way David would have been like, yes, yes, Amnon, you can marry your sister when it's against the law. Okay, but maybe she was saying that to kind of divert him and get out of the situation so that she could avoid being raped. Okay, verse 14. However, he would not heed her because he knows that's not true. And being stronger than her, he forced her and lay with her. So he had ample warning that what he was doing was wrong. And he had the opportunity to stop himself, but he didn't. He chose to give in to his own lust and his own passions. And it's worse, it's even worse than what David did. Or actually it's along the same lines, because in Leviticus it talks about adultery too. Okay? And so he rapes his sister. And verse 13 says, then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred which he hated her, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, arise, be gone. So this is where I see that things have gotten worse for Amnon than they were for David. Because after David did what he did with Bathsheba, and she came, you know, it seems like his lust was satisfied. He was going about his business. It wasn't until she came and told him that he was pregnant that he tried to cover the whole thing up. Okay? But he still felt responsibility to deal with her. He wasn't mean to her. He didn't hate her. He didn't try to have her eliminated or anything like that. Okay, but with Amnon, we see the same sin, the sin of thinking that I want this. So I should be able to have it. And if it can't be mine lawfully, I'll take it unlawfully. That's the sin that David committed. And now we see Amnon committing the same sin. Okay? We see his children following his example. Okay? And so, but now, Amnon is turning his guilt that he must have immediately felt after he did the wrong thing, after the lust has cooled, after he's satisfied. Now he can look at what he's done and see that it's disgusting. And he turns all that disgust on Tamar. It's your fault. Okay? You represent my sin that I just committed. Get this sin as far away from me as possible. Get out. And we saw that. We see that happen. We've seen that happen in other situations. You know, where you wanted me so bad, and now that you've had me, you don't care about me anymore. Okay? And so, verse 16, it says, so she said to him, no, indeed, this evil of sending me away is worse than the other that you did to me. But he would not listen to her. Then he called his servant who attended him and said, here, put this woman out, away from me, and bolt the door behind her. Now she had on a robe of many colors, for the king's virgin daughters wore such apparel, and his servants put her out and blotted the door behind her. Then Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her robe of many colors that was on her and laid her hand on her head and went away crying bitterly. So she didn't try to hide what happened to her. Okay? She let it be known that this has happened to her. Okay? And verse 20, and Absalom, her brother, said to her, has Amnon, your brother, been with you? And she must have said, yes. But it's interesting that he immediately knew it was Amnon. So even though Amnon thinks nobody knows how he felt about Tamar, it was at least obvious to Absalom. Okay? And so it says, but now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this thing to heart. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. So Absalom brings her under his wing. Okay? And he tells her, just let it go. But we know Absalom's not going to let it go. Okay? And so verse 21 says, but when King David heard all of these things, he was very angry. And Absalom spoke to his brother Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister. So wait a minute. Absalom rapes his sister. David finds out about it, and the only thing he does is get angry. Even if you're not a father, you're a king. A sin has been committed. And in the law, there are stipulations that have to be met when a woman is raped like this. If you go back and look through Leviticus. This is not a sin that you just get mad and go about your business. Okay? But we see this as a parenting flaw in David. He's not dealing with Amnon, his son. And Absalom is justifiably upset about this lack of justice. And because David doesn't deal with Amnon, Absalom has anger festering in his heart toward Amnon. Okay? You didn't deal with it. Now I need to deal with this thing because it's not okay that Amnon raped my sister. If you're a father, you should do something as a father. If you're a father and you're not going to do something, you should at least do something as king. Okay? So we see the seed that there's no justice under the king starting to take root in Absalom's heart. And it's going to affect him. Okay? So you see how this thing is unfolding. You see how the strife is unfolding in the household. It's like David sins, and it sets things into motion. It affects him. It affects the people he's sinning against. But that's not it. It affects his children. It affects how they behave and how they see the world and what they think that's permissible for them to do. All right, so let's continue. Verse 23. And it came to pass after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep shearers. So 2 years later, 2 years go by with no resolution to this. And Absalom hasn't let it go. Okay, so he has sheep shearers in Bel Hazor, which is near Ephraim. So Absalom invited all the king's sons. Then Absalom came to the king and said, kindly note, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant. But the king said to Absalom, no, my son, let us not all go now, lest we be a burden to you. Then he urged him, but he would not go, and he blessed him. Then Absalom said, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said to him, why should he go with you? He's suspicious. Wait a minute, you don't talk to Amnon. You don't say good stuff nor bad stuff. Why do you want him at your feast now? So he's a little suspicious, but he doesn't allow that to make him put a stop to it. He's very passive father. Verse 27. But Absalom urged him, so Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. So, here we see a parental dynamic between David and his sons. David's not really comfortable with having all the king's sons at a feast with Absalom. I mean, to a certain extent, it's a matter of national security. These are people that are going to take the throne after him. It's probably not good to have all of them at one place at one time. Okay? But then he's begging him, but it'll be fun. We're going to have fun. And you know how kids do when they want something and you're telling them no. They keep pressing you and pressing you and pressing you. And apparently David has no ability to stand up to his kids. So Absalom is kind of crafty about it. Well, if all the sons can't go, can Absalom go? Well, why would you only want Absalom? Okay, all right, yeah, he can go. Okay, well, all of y'all can go. He just gives into it. So he sends them all to this feast with Absalom at his house. So verse 28. Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, watch now. When Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. So this is premeditated. It wasn't once Amnon was at his house and Absalom got kind of drunk, old bitter feelings rose up in his house about Tamar, and in the moment he had a lapse of judgment and he had Amnon killed. That's not how it goes down. He premeditates a situation where Amnon is going to be vulnerable, and he arranges it for his servants to kill him. Okay, let's continue. It says, do not be afraid. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and valiant. This is so ironic, okay? Because you can see here that Absalom sees himself as being justified in the actions that he's taking. He's using the kind of language that God uses with David and God used with Joshua. Don't be afraid. Be courageous. Be valiant, because you're doing a just and righteous thing. And didn't I tell you to do it? So, don't be afraid. Don't have this lapse of morality where you start thinking we can't kill Amnon. He's the crown prince. Don't be afraid to kill him because he's a prince. I'm telling you to do it, and I'm in the right, because justice needs to be done. Amnon raped my sister. My father didn't do anything about it. Okay? And so I need to take care of this situation, since there's no justice in my father's kingdom. I need to create justice for myself. Okay? And so verse 29 says, so the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons rose, and each one got on his mule and fled. So when they saw that he killed Amnon, they felt like their lives were threatened. They were like, wait a minute, is this a conspiracy against all of us? And so they all flee. Okay? And it came to pass while they were on the way that news came to David, saying, Absalom has killed all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. So the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the ground, and all his servants stood with their clothes torn. So the very thing he was concerned about in the beginning when Absalom said he wanted to do this feast, he thinks it's coming to pass. Oh no, Absalom has killed all the princes. Verse 32. Then Jonadab, the son of Shimei, of course Jonadab is there, David's brother, answered and said, let not my lord suppose they have killed all the young men, the king's son, for only Amnon is dead. For by the command of Absalom this has been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar. Now therefore do not let my lord the king take the thing to heart, to think that all the king's sons are dead, for only Amnon is dead. So this kind of softens the blow. He's like, at first David thought all his sons were dead. But Jonadab looks at the situation and said, I don't know if he was in on it, if he knew that Absalom was going to do this, and he was kind of placed there to smooth the blow the way he does, or if he just looks at the situation and realizes, no, Absalom never had a plan to kill all the king's son. His beef is with Amnon, and he's been looking for a way to get revenge on Amnon from the time he found out that Amnon raped his sister Tamar. So only Amnon is dead. Okay? And so it says in verse 34, then Absalom fled, and the young man who was keeping watch lifted his eyes and looked, and there were many people coming from the road on the hillside. So the fact that Absalom flees makes it clear that he knows that even though he said all that to his servants, like that, he would protect them for the evil that he's done, Absalom realizes that he's wrong to kill Amnon, and that David might retaliate, and that he's not safe. So he flees. So the promise of protection that he gave his servants is kind of like an empty promise. Okay? And so, because he himself is fleeing. So how are you going to protect me? Okay? And so verse 35 says, and Jonadab said to the king, look, the king's sons are coming, as your servant said. So it is. So it was as soon as he had finished speaking that the king's sons indeed came, and they lifted up their voice and wept. Also the king and all of his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. So he goes to his mother's people. His mother's father is a king. He goes and gets protection from them. Okay? Verse 38, so Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there for 3 years. And King David longed to go to Absalom, for he had been comforted concerning Amnon, because he was dead. So Absalom kills his brother, and David doesn't do anything about it. He doesn't implement justice. Absalom flees to his father's people, maybe thinking that if David comes after him to bring him to justice, his father's people will defend him, as it should have been. Okay? But David, he's not acting like a father, neither is he acting like a king. Okay? So we see all of his weaknesses coming to the forefront. Okay? What was interesting to me as I see, because this is, the beginning of the sword not departing from his house, like Nathan said to him when he was telling him, the judgment that was coming on him because of what he did with Bathsheba and Uriah. Okay? What I don't see in the story is like what we read in the story of Egypt, where it says stuff like the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart and stuff. We don't see anything like that as this judgment unfolds. We don't see God put it on Amnon's heart to have this lustful passion toward his sister, and that's what set that into motion. We don't see God put it on Absalom's heart to get revenge on his brother because he wanted this judgment to come to pass. But what we do see is that David's actions set this whole thing into motion, okay? And everything is just unfolding. So it tells me that when you come into agreement with Satan and you follow him into that first sin, it's a slippery slope that continues to snowball in your life. And it affects you, it affects the people you're sinning against, and it affects your children. And David isn't over his head. He has too many wives. He has too many children. How in the world is he going to do a good job? And he's not doing a good job. His version of parenting is being overindulgent and not correcting his sons when he should and not disciplining his sons the way he should. Okay? All of this could have stopped in the very beginning if David would have confronted and dealt with Amnon after he raped his sister. He didn't do that. He was angry. But being angry and yelling and nagging and not following through is not enough. Because it takes care of the frustration and the burden and the responsibility that we feel as parents when we do those things. But when we don't follow through in any kind of practical way, it doesn't change anything for our kids. Okay? And if David had done what he was supposed to do, Absalom wouldn't have felt like he had to do something. Absalom wouldn't have felt like there is no justice unless I take matters into my own hands. Okay? So what I had seen as the judgment of God in the beginning, and it is also, it's almost like God is letting him know in advance all the stuff that's going to happen to him because of his sin. God's not manipulating this stuff to happen in the same way that it to me it initially reads like that when you read about it in from what Nathan said. And if God's judgment unfolds in that way, it's easy for me to reconcile a loving God with the bad things that are happening as a consequence of our actions. What it does is it reinforces the image that God does give us choice and the ability to move and live according to the choices that we make. He's not manipulating us like puppets. He's not manipulating us like puppets to do things against our will, even if the things that we're doing are things that he would prefer for us not to do. In this, God demonstrates his true love, that everything that we do for him, we have to bring it to him in and of our own selves, of our own free will. He doesn't force us to do what he wants us to do. But as a result, sometimes we have to deal with the consequences of our actions. And we have to know that our sin, just like Adam's sin didn't only affect him, it affected every person that came through him. And it affects even us today. What we do affects our children. It affects our family. It affects the people around us. It opens up the door for the enemy to come in and operate in deception. Look at the level of deception Jonadab is operating under. He's just like Satan, the plan he gave Amnon. And the way he told David, oh, it's not as bad as you think. Only Amnon is dead. And after all, we should have dealt with him anyway because he did rape Tamar. This is just Absalom dealing with something you should have dealt with a long time ago. And this kind of ties David's hands, at least to a certain extent. It looks like he felt like his hands were tied. Because that is true. I should have did something. I didn't do nothing. Now this is happening. I'm partly responsible. I'm partly responsible that Amnon was even there because I gave Absalom permission to invite him. I gave him permission to go. I'm partly responsible. How am I going to do what needs to be done now? Plus, I love Absalom. I actually love Absalom. And I don't want anything bad to happen to him. Okay? But it's like your love is killing him. Your inaction is killing him. Your lack of parenting is killing him. And all of these weaknesses are coming upon you. All of these weaknesses are making all of these bad things come upon you. Okay? And it gets worse. In chapter 14, so he leaves him and he doesn't do anything. He leaves him with his father, his mother's people, and he just doesn't deal with him. David doesn't deal with Absalom. He longs for Absalom. He wishes he could have a relationship with Absalom, but he doesn't do anything good or bad. But this has an effect on Absalom, And we see this a lot with rebellious kids. When they do the terrible thing that they did, and they expect a response from their parent. Because if you care about me, you're going to respond. Okay? But this lack of response, I did this, and you're not even going to respond. Do you even love me? Do you even care about me? It makes even more bitterness grow in the heart of the child. Okay? So by David doing nothing, it makes bitterness grow even more in Absalom's heart. And Joab, the commander of his army, who's ever concerned about David, loyal to him to a fault, but also ever concerned about the kingdom of Israel, he realizes that Absalom has now become a really huge threat to Israel. Okay? He's a legitimate heir to the throne. He's with his mother's people, a king with an army that could threaten David. And he has feelings of bitterness and discontent toward his father. David, you're going to leave him out there like that? You need to deal with this situation. It's been 3 years. Okay? So Joab devises this plan, where he realizes he can't just go directly and speak to David, but David seems to be able to understand when you speak to him in parables. So he does it. He does something similar to what God sent Nathan to do by telling him the story of the rich man and the poor man. This time Joab sends an old woman to masquerade as a widow who has 2 sons. One son has killed another son, and now justice is being demanded on the life of the second son. And the old woman is like, if both of my sons die, there's not going to be anyone to pass on the family name. Everybody loses. And she appeals to David to show mercy in her situation, okay? And to forget about, let's cover up justice in this situation for the sake of family loyalty and to preserve the family name, And David is able to say, yes, in the story, I'll do this thing for you. Okay, so verse 11, the old woman says, please let the king remember the Lord your God, and do not permit the Avenger of Blood to destroy any more, lest they destroy my son. And he said, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. So the whole thing with the Avenger of Blood is that, in every family there's somebody whose job it is to, if somebody gets murdered or killed, to make sure that justice is met. And there are even cities of refuge in place, so that if somebody gets killed, and then the person whose job it is to avenge the death of that person, you need to know what the situation is before you do it, because people die by accident too. And so if someone is killed by accident, the process is different for someone who's murdered. Okay, and so cities of refuge were created so that when somebody dies, and then the person whose job it is to avenge their death comes to see that justice is done, You know, we want to hear the whole story first. So there's a city you can run to so that your case can be heard properly. Okay. And so in this situation, this woman is saying, don't let the Avenger of Blood kill my son, because he is guilty for killing his brother. You know, there's no city of refuge for him because he is guilty for killing his brother. You know, so that my family name won't perish. You know, cover this thing up. Okay. And so he's appealing to David, like, even God is merciful like this. Even God has the heart. It says, yet God does, this is verse 14, yet God does not take away a life, but he devises means so that his banished ones are not expelled from him. Therefore, I have come to speak of this thing to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. And your maidservant said, I will now speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his maidservant. For the king will hear and deliver his maidservant from the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son together from the inheritance of God. So he's saying even God is merciful. But God's not merciful at the expense of justice. God does come and redeem people that deserve to die, but he meets the requirement for justice. Okay, the requirement for justice is met because Jesus died to you know, in the place of the person who deserved to die for the sin that they committed. But this woman is trying to work through a loophole. So all of this is Joab trying to get the king to be like, yes, Absalom shouldn't have killed Amnon, but we need to resolve this situation. You know, I know you're stuck in this place because you realize that some kind of justice needs to be done, but you're just unwilling to do it. You have to do something, because you can't just leave him out there. And you can't just leave him out there as a threat to the kingdom of Israel if he gathers up enough forces. You know, since you're not willing to execute him for what he did to Amnon, you need to reconcile with him. Let go of your need to have justice done. It is really what I feel like the veiled message that Joab is sending. Okay? So, you know, a little bit of perversion of justice going on. All of which will justify Absalom's belief that his father's administration is not just. So why should he submit himself to his father's administration? If justice won't be shown to him, then he'll take justice for himself. Okay? You see how this is all unfolding. You see how the strife is developing in his father's house. All without God necessarily manipulating people's hearts to make this thing happen, because he had spoken this judgment through Nathan before any of it even happened. Okay? So I could continue reading the passage, but I think that the live is already long as it is. But suffices to say, what ends up happening is he brings Absalom home, but he's not willing to reconcile. So he brings him home and just makes him sit there for a long time. Go to your own house. You're not welcome in my house. And it says years go by and he doesn't even see his father's face. Let me see where it says that. He returned in verse 24. It says, and the king said, let him return to his own house, but do not let him see my face. So he's still not dealing with the situation. So Absalom returned to his own house, but he did not see the king's face. Okay, so 2 years go by with him being back home in Jerusalem, but he's still at odds with his father. Everybody knows he's at odds and has lost favor with his father, but his father hasn't really done anything. And so Absalom justifiably feels like, why have I come from Geshur? It would have been better for me to be there still. Now therefore let me see the king's face, but if there is iniquity in me, let him execute me. So he's like, Dad, if you're mad at me about Absalom, just execute me then. But if you're not going to execute me, why did you make me come to Jerusalem and sit here like some kind of discarded son? You won't let me participate, in life as a prince should. What's the point of this? This level of punishment that you're meting out on me is unjust. This is not the right way to deal with the situation. Either execute me or reconcile with me. Okay? And so, or send me back to Geshur. What am I doing here? Okay, and so David ends up reconciling with Absalom, but their relationship is not restored. There's a rift between them. He does love Absalom, but there's a rift between them. And Absalom takes his bitterness and he develops a plan to be like, well, since my dad's not a righteous judge, it would be better for me to be the judge. And because he's good looking and charismatic, and because he says the right things to the people, he stirs up Israel to feel like justice is absent in David's court, and that they'd be better off with Absalom. And so he starts a rebellion. And and it's all done with so much deception. He fools his father into sending him to Hebron, where he rallies up even more support and even gains the ear of Ahithophel, the king's advisor. And I want to say, like, I was looking this up before because I wanted to look this up to make sure that what I was thinking was right. I want to say Ahithophel is Bathsheba's grandfather. Is he? Let me see. Because Ahithophel ends up going to... Okay, it says Ahithophel was renowned for his wisdom and wise counsel. Yes. Ahithophel, David's chief advisor, who ends up siding with Absalom in his mutiny against his father, is Bathsheba's grandfather, who has beef with David over all the dirt he did over the whole Uriah Bathsheba situation. And this whole situation makes me see that, truly justice is met. Truly, even though, David was forgiven and his kingdom wasn't taken away from him, it wasn't a small thing what he did to Uriah. And the consequences of that had long-lasting effects. And you guys, I'm not coming on here with this live like I have a bunch of answers, about everything. But it just really is making me reflect about, how I think about judgment and how judgment unfolds and how God works in the lives of people and how much of it is personal responsibility because we've set things into motion. And in the beginning, I alluded to this, how do I need to pray? Like if I've done something that I shouldn't have done, or I'm guilty of some great evil like that, and I've set things into motion. Lord, show me how to pray. Lord, show me how to reconcile, how to deal with these relationships that have been affected by the sins in my life so that this calamity doesn't continue to snowball. Because it seems like it gets worse. That same sin, if it's not purged, gets worse from generation to generation. It's powerful. It's powerful. And initially I thought about not even coming on here, and doing this live because it's just really just reflective. And I'm speculating and I'm asking questions and I'm wondering. But I think this is an important part of the process when you study God's word. It's an important part of the process to look at things, to reflect about them, to wrestle with God, to ask him questions, to wonder, how it fits, how it's relevant for you today. I'm itching like crazy. My nose is itching like crazy. My nose is itching. The back of my throat is draining, and it's a fight to not give in to allergies. But anyway, as I was saying, It's all part of the process. It's all part of the process. So you guys, that's all I have for you today. And I'm over here looking at the chat and I don't see anything. So if you wanted to talk and have a conversation with me today, now is the time. Now is the time to put something in the chat to say hey. If you want to say hey, or give this video a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whatever you feel the Lord leading you to do, or however you feel about it. It does, here's your big chance. But that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you have a blessed time. Okay, but the story ends. A blessed day today is what I was going to say. But I just realized I didn't let you know where this leaves off because I stopped reading it. Okay, but the story ends with Absalom amassing his support in Hebron. David realizing that his son has launched a legitimate rebellion against him and that his life is threatened. David gathering up all his household and a bunch of supporters and leaving Jerusalem. And initially, the priests follow him out with the ark. Okay, that's how bad it is. And he runs for his life. And it says he leaves 10 of his concubines behind in his house. Okay, and I've read this story before, so just keep those 10 concubines in mind. Okay. And so now it's a face-off between David and Absalom. All along he hasn't dealt with Absalom. Now he's forced to deal with Absalom. And it's really tragic, y'all. Could you imagine? This is his son that he loves. But it's a messy, complicated situation. And yet again, David turns to God and says, well, God is going to resolve this thing. He tells the priest to bring the ark back. And I just realized the implications of that. He tells the priest to bring the ark back because bringing the ark with him would almost be a statement of him saying that, I know God is on my side. I deserve to have God on my side. But it seems like, even now he's in a place where he's realizing that he's done some things he shouldn't have done. And maybe these things are happening to him because he doesn't deserve for God to stay with him in this. Okay? It's almost like he's saying, let God choose between me and Absalom to see who should be king. And so he sends the ark back so that he doesn't have an unfair advantage. It's so interesting. So he sends the ark back and he says, if God has chosen me and if God has decided to still work with me, then he'll bring me back to Jerusalem and the ark. I don't have to take the ark by force, And so it's almost like he's saying, you be the judge, God. And to me, it's also almost like he's saying, in the ways that I haven't been able to judge, in the ways I wasn't a good judge, now you be the righteous judge in this situation. I need you to judge between me and Absalom, since I didn't do what I was supposed to do, or I couldn't do what it was necessary for me to do. You do it, Lord. And God will do it. It will be painful for David, but it will be necessary. Okay? And that's the thing. Sometimes what we need to do is painful, but it's necessary. And I think as we run to avoid the pain, I feel like the pain that we put ourselves under as we run to avoid the pain of doing what we know we need to do is so much worse than what happens when you do what you need to do. Because deliverance actually comes and healing actually comes when you do what you're supposed to do, what God is calling you to do. Okay? So That's it right there. I feel like this thing that I said toward the end is the thing that I really needed to release this morning. So I hope that's a blessing to you. Be blessed. Don't get dizzy.